Beginning at 2:30 a.m., Tyler's division moved from its encampment toward the Confederate defenses at the Stone Bridge. While crossing Cub Run, however, the disorganized Federal forces bottlenecked over the narrow suspension bridge that spanned the stream. It was not until 5:30 that the rear elements of Tyler's division completed their crossing, significantly delaying the flanking elements' timetable. Around 6 a.m., Tyler's division nears the Stone Bridge. He deploys General Robert Shanks' brigade on the left side of the Warrington Pike with Colonel William Sherman's brigade on the right behind his artillery, with the brigade of Colonel Erasmus Keyes remained in reserve. After deploying his men, General Tyler orders his massive 30-pound rifled artillery piece to fire 3 shots, signaling the beginning of the battle. Across the creek is Colonel Evans' small brigade consisting of the 1st Louisiana Battalion in the left, the 4th South Carolina on the right, and Lieutenant Davidson's 2-gun battery in support. Colonel Evans, a veteran Indian fighter with a penchant for heavy drinking, wisely positioned his brigade on the heights, which during the time of the battle offered a clear view of the Union forces amassing near the Stone Bridge. As the Federals open fire, Colonel Evans keeps his artillery silent to avoid giving away his true strength. Instead, Colonel Evans deploys 2 companies from the 4th South Carolina and a single company from the 1st Louisiana Battalion forward as skirmishers to cover the bridge. In turn, the Federals advance their skirmishers, exchanging shots with their Confederate counterparts across the creek. After a while, with no other Federal advance materializing to his front, Colonel Evans deduces that General Tyler's movement toward the Stone Bridge is only a feint. As General Tyler initiates his holding action on the Confederate left, Colonel Richardson opens his artillery along the Confederate right, even managing to land a shell through General Beauregard's headquarters located at the house of Wilmer McLean. Upon hearing reports of skirmishing along the Confederate left, General Johnston sends forth the brigades of General B and Colonel Bartow along with the Hampton Legion to support Colonel Evans's lone brigade. As the fighting along the Stone Bridge ignited, Colonel Hunter's and Heiselman's divisions continued their march north to outflank the Confederate left. The road they trek is little more than a narrow wagon path, and men with axes were needed to clear the trail. The blazing morning sun baked the men of the Union flanking column as they continued their movement to turn the rebel left. From atop Signal Hill, miles away from the column, a Confederate signalman named Captain Edward Porter Alexander spotted a bright glint off to the left of Evans's position. Upon closer examination, the anomaly in the distance was light reflecting off the muskets and artillery of the Union flanking column. Using signal flags, Captain Porter sends a message to Colonel Evans, warning him to
"Look out for your left. You are turned."
Colonel Evans reacted instinctively, knowing he would be outflanked if he remained in place and that the army risked being turned if he retreated. Colonel Evans left behind 4 companies of the 4th South Carolina to hold General Tyler in place as he quickly marched the rest of his brigade, around 900 men, to immediately check the Union advance. Colonel Evans and his brigade quickly moved north to Poplar Ford, but noticing that Union troops are further west near Sudley Ford, they dart to Buck Hill. Evans then sends skirmishers forward to check the Union advance near the crest of Matthews Hill. The lead brigade of Hunter's division, commanded by Colonel Ambrose Burnside, crossed the Sudley Spring Ford. The ford acts as a bottleneck, further slowing the Union advance. Moving south along Sudley Road, past the Sudley Church, the Union soldiers had spent their long morning slowly marching to outflank the Confederates, picking berries along the way, and were confident that they had successfully infiltrated the Confederate rear. As the 2nd Rhode Island advanced toward the crest of Matthews Hill, their optimism was quickly dashed by a volley fired by Evans's advanced skirmishers. Surprised by the appearance of rebels to his front, Colonel Burnside quickly sent forth 5 companies of the 2nd Rhode Island who drove back Colonel Evans's skirmishers. The 2nd Rhode Island regrouped and marched across the crest of Matthews Hill, only to be showered by lead fired from the rest of Evans's brigade.
Perfect hailstorm of bullets, round shot, and shell was poured into us, tearing through the ranks and scattering death and confusion everywhere.
While advancing, Colonel John Slocum, the commander of the 2nd Rhode Island, was killed, sapping the regiment's forward momentum. In a callback to Napoleonic-style tactics, Colonel Burnside ordered Captain William Reynolds' 6-gun battery to support the 2nd Rhode Island by firing at close range into the Confederates. However, he kept the rest of his brigade behind the reverse crest of Matthews Hill. Meanwhile, communication issues plagued Hunter's division as they attempted to deploy to face Evans. Half of Burnside's brigade remained in place behind the front lines while the 2nd Rhode Island and Reynolds' battery battled against Evans's Confederates. Colonel Hunter ordered Colonel Andrew Porter's brigade to meet the enemy, but seeing Burnside's 71st New York and 2nd New Hampshire lazing behind the crest of Matthews Hill, Colonel Porter instead began to employ them further back, costing the Union valuable time and squandering their advantage in numbers. Further compounding the confusion, Colonel Hunter was wounded and had to be removed from the field, leaving Burnside in command. He tried to maintain the momentum by ordering the 71st New York and 2nd New Hampshire to advance, but the former regiment was so disorganized as to render it combat ineffective, while the latter began advancing on the wrong side of the Sudley Springs Road. Colonel Burnside then appealed to his last unengaged regiment, shouting,
"Forward, 1st Rhode Island,"
as the men advanced to support their sister regiment. On the Confederate side, after exchanging a few volleys with the 2nd Rhode Island, the commander of the 1st Louisiana Battalion, Major Chantham Roberdeau Wheat, a veteran of numerous campaigns in Central America and Europe, ordered his Louisianians to advance into a perceived gap in the Union line. The Louisiana Tigers, with their colorful uniforms and fearsome reputation, charged towards the enemy, many men dropping their muskets and drawing their bowie knives in the process. However, the perceived gap was quickly closed by the advancing 1st Rhode Island. The Tigers' ferocity could not withstand the sustained volleys of the Rhode Islanders, and they were forced to retreat. In the smoke-filled confusion of battle, the Blue Jackets of the Tigers confused the 4th South Carolina, who unfortunately fired a volley into the retreating Tigers before command was restored. The 1st Louisiana Battalion reformed to the left of the 4th South Carolina on the opposite side of the Manassas-Sudley Road. This resulted in the right flank of the 4th South Carolina being vulnerable. With his right flank exposed, Evans was in desperate need of reinforcement, and he rode to Henry Hill to confer with General B, who had just arrived with the 4th Alabama and 2nd Mississippi from his brigade, along with Colonel Bartow and his 7th and 8th Georgia, and a battery commanded by Captain John Imboden. General B had observed the battle occurring on Matthews Hill and believed that his position on Henry Hill to be stronger. However, Colonel Evans was determined to hold his position. Relinquishing to Colonel Evans's judgment, General B rode over to the 4th Alabama shouting,
"Up, Alabamians!"
and ordered them to cross the Warrenton Turnpike to the right of the 4th South Carolina. The Alabamians advanced to defend the position, previously vacated by the Tigers, to the right of the 4th South Carolina. Still, realizing that Colonel Evans required more men to hold off the overwhelming Union assault, B brought forward additional units from his command. The 8th Georgia of Colonel Bartow's brigade moved to support the right of the 4th Alabama, while Colonel Evans shifted the 4th South Carolina to the left to make room for B's 2nd Mississippi. Bartow's 7th Georgia was in reserve near the Robinson Farm, owned by one of the few free black farmers in the country, as a reserve, while Imboden's battery shelled the advancing Union forces from atop Henry Hill. In response to the reinforced Confederate line, Colonel Burnside successfully organized the 71st New York, bringing them into battle line between Reynolds' battery and 1st Rhode Island while leveraging the 2nd New Hampshire as a reserve. Colonel Porter, who had just assumed command of Hunter's division from Burnside, organized his brigade for battle on the western side of the Manassas-Sudley Road, while Captain Charles Griffin's 6-gun battery galloped forward to cover the Union right. Fearing that the 8th Georgia threatened his left flank, Colonel Burnside immediately implored to Colonel Porter for reinforcements, exclaiming,
"Porter, for God's sake, let me have the regulars. My men are being cut to pieces."
Porter hesitated, loaning Burnside his most combat-ready troops, Major George Sykes' regular battalion. However, after Burnside expressed that the Confederates could impose themselves between the Federal line of retreat should his flank be turned, Porter relented and ordered Sykes to support the 2nd Rhode Island's left, while the regulars cut into the 8th Georgia. Further on the Union right, Porter's men advanced against Evans' dwindling brigade. Captain James Ricketts' battery moved into position next to Griffin's to support the advance. Major Wheat was shot through the lungs, causing his battalion's lines to crumble. In the center, the 71st New York brought up their own 2-gun section of boat howitzers to support Reynolds' battery. The situation on the Confederate right became desperate as Sherman and Keyes' brigades from Tyler's division crossed Farm Ford upstream from the Stone Bridge. They realized the area was crossable when a rebel commander rode into the middle of the creek to taunt them. After scaling up the slopes, General Tyler began to array his division into battle lines, overlapping the Confederate right. Heintzelman's 1st Minnesota then fell onto the right flank of the 8th Georgia. Beginning with individuals and increasing to small groups, the Confederates began to withdraw from their increasingly tenuous position on Matthews Hill. Around 11:30, General B ordered a general retreat with the 4th Alabama, attempting to cover the withdrawal. The 8th Georgia routed immediately, even receiving some fire from the 69th New York of Sherman's brigade as they withdrew in confusion. As the Federals amassed their force of around 12,000 men, the beleaguered and heavily outnumbered Confederates withdrew to the protection of Henry Hill, with the 4th Alabama covering the rear near the Stone House. Relishing his victory, General McDowell rode further, shouting, "Victory! Victory! The day is ours!" When a nearby Union soldier lamented that he had not yet had a chance to face the enemy in battle, McDowell retorted, "Shut up your damned head. You'll get chances enough, maybe before this day is over." If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.